For 300 years, one sea connected the greatest powers on earth. Rome, built on conquest and control. Egypt, the last kingdom standing in its path. One man believed the Republic was his to save. The other chose a queen and an empire of his own. In 31 BC, their fleets met off the coast of Greece. What followed was not just a battle. It was the last day of the Roman Republic. September 2nd, 31 BC, the Ionian Sea off the coast of Greece. 400 warships carrying the combined might of Egypt and Rome's eastern legions sit in formation at the narrow Strait of Actium. Across the water, 400 more. Octavian's fleet. In the next 6 hours, every question about the future of civilization will be answered. Who rules Rome? Whether Egypt survives as a kingdom, whether the Republic dies or transforms into something the world has never seen. On one side, Mark Antony, Rome's greatest living general, the man who avenged Caesar. Behind him, Cleopatra VII, the richest monarch on earth, commanding the Egyptian fleet. On the other, Gaius Octavian, Caesar's adopted son, 31 years old. No military genius, but he has something Antony doesn't, a man named Agrippa. This is the story of how the ancient world ended and the Roman Empire began. 15 years before Actium, Rome was ruled by one man. Julius Caesar had crushed every rival, conquered every enemy, and declared himself dictator for life. On March 15th, 44 BC, 23 knife wounds ended all of it. Caesar's assassination didn't save the Republic, it shattered it. Within hours, Rome split into factions. The assassins, Brutus and Cassius, fled east to raise armies. The Senate scrambled for control, and two men stepped forward to claim Caesar's legacy. The first was Mark Antony, Caesar's right hand, a soldier's soldier, charismatic, fearless, beloved by the legions. He had fought beside Caesar in Gaul and expected to inherit his political power. The second was a surprise, Gaius Octavian, Caesar's 18-year-old grandnephew. Nobody in Rome took him seriously. Antony reportedly laughed when he heard the boy intended to claim Caesar's name and fortune. He was skinny, sickly, and had never commanded an army. Antony underestimated him. It would be the worst miscalculation in Roman history. Octavian understood something Antony didn't. In Rome, legitimacy was more dangerous than legions. Caesar's will had adopted Octavian as his son and heir. That single document gave an 18-year-old nobody the most powerful name in the world, Caesar. But names don't win wars alone. Rome still had assassins to deal with. In 43 BC, Antony, Octavian, and a third man, Lepidus, formed the Second Triumvirate, a formal alliance backed by law, granting all three dictatorial powers. Their first act was a purge. Death lists posted in the forum. Over 300 senators and 2,000 equestrians hunted and executed. Among the dead was Cicero, Rome's greatest orator, the voice of the Republic. His hands and head were nailed to the speaker's platform in the forum, a message to anyone who still believed in the old ways. With Rome secured through blood, Antony and Octavian turned east. At Philippi in 42 BC, they crushed the armies of Brutus and Cassius. It was Antony who won that battle, commanding the field with brilliance, while Octavian was reportedly too sick to fight. Both assassins committed suicide. The Republic's last defenders were dead. But Philippi created a new question, one that would take 13 years and one final battle to answer. Which of these two men would rule Rome. After Philippi, they divided the Roman world. Antony took the east, Greece, Asia Minor, Syria, the wealthy provinces. Octavian took the west, Italy, Gaul, Spain. On paper, Antony got the better deal. But Octavian got something more valuable, Rome itself. Antony's priority was Parthia, Rome's unfinished business. Caesar had been planning an invasion when he was assassinated. Antony intended to finish it. But to invade Parthia, he needed money, enormous amounts of it. And there was only one person in the eastern Mediterranean with that kind of wealth. In 41 BC, Antony summoned Cleopatra VII to the city of Tarsus. He expected a client queen coming to beg for Roman favor. She sailed up the river Cydnus on a golden barge, purple sails, silver oars, dressed as the goddess Aphrodite under a canopy of gold cloth while incense burned on the deck. The entire city came to the riverbank to watch. This was not a woman coming to submit. This was a queen making a general understand exactly who he was dealing with. Cleopatra was 28 years old. She spoke 9 languages. She had survived palace coups, a civil war against her own brother, and an alliance with Julius Caesar that produced a son, Caesarion. She was arguably the most politically sophisticated leader alive, and she understood that her kingdom's survival depended on being indispensable to whoever held power in Rome. Antony was captivated. What began as a political negotiation became something far more complicated. Within months, they were lovers. Within a year, twins. But this was more than a love affair. It was a strategic alliance. Cleopatra got Roman military protection. Antony got unlimited Egyptian gold. Each needed the other. The question was, who was using whom? Back in Rome, Octavian watched all of this very carefully. Octavian was not a great general. He was not particularly charismatic. He was frequently sick, but he possessed a genius that Antony completely lacked, the ability to control a narrative. While Antony built a life in the East, Octavian built a story in Rome. Antony had abandoned Rome, abandoned his Roman wife, Octavia, Octavian's own sister. He had fallen under the spell of a foreign queen who wanted to rule the world from Alexandria. How much of this was true? Some of it. Antony did grant Cleopatra territories that belonged to Rome, parts of Syria, Phoenicia, Cyprus, Crete. He declared Caesarion the legitimate heir of Julius Caesar, a direct threat to Octavian's entire political identity. But Octavian turned facts into weapons. Every dispatch from the East was reframed. Antony wasn't building a strategic alliance. He was a slave to an Egyptian seductress. Cleopatra wasn't a shrewd operator. She was a sorceress who had bewitched Rome's greatest general. The Roman people ate it up. Romans feared the East. They feared foreign influence. And the image of a Roman general kneeling before an Egyptian queen triggered something deep, the terror that Rome could be conquered not by armies, but by corruption. In 34 BC, Antony staged the donations of Alexandria, distributing eastern kingdoms to Cleopatra's children. He appeared not in a Roman toga, but in the robes of a Greek monarch. To Roman eyes, he had stopped being Roman. Octavian read Antony's will aloud in the Senate, a will that allegedly requested burial in Alexandria beside Cleopatra, not in Rome. Whether it was genuine or forged didn't matter. The Senate was horrified. In 32 BC, Rome declared war, not on Antony, but on Cleopatra, a foreign enemy. It made Antony's choice binary: abandon the queen or become a traitor to Rome. Antony chose Cleopatra. In the spring of 31 BC, Antony and Cleopatra assembled one of the largest military forces the ancient world had ever seen. Over 100,000 infantry, 12,000 cavalry, and nearly 500 warships. They positioned themselves on the western coast of Greece at the Gulf of Ambracia, near the promontory of Actium. The strategy was straightforward: control the sea lanes, force Octavian to fight on Antony's terms. But Octavian had Agrippa. Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa was everything Octavian was not: a military genius, born common, no noble family, no political name, but arguably the finest naval commander Rome ever produced, and completely, unshakably loyal to Octavian. While Antony sat in his fortified harbor waiting for a decisive battle, Agrippa dismantled his position piece by piece. He raided supply lines along the Greek coast, captured the port of Methone, cutting off grain from Egypt, seized key positions around the Gulf, slowly tightening a noose Antony didn't realize was closing. Weeks turned into months. Antony's army starved. Malaria spread through the camps. Soldiers deserted, not a few, but entire units crossing to Octavian. Generals who had served Antony for years quietly switched sides. The harbor meant to protect his fleet had become a cage. His war council split. Roman officers urged him to abandon the fleet and fight on land, where Antony's command of legions could turn the tide. Cleopatra disagreed. The Egyptian fleet represented Egypt's power. Lose the ships, lose Egypt's leverage. She insisted they fight at sea and break through. This was the moment the war was decided, not on the battlefield, but in a tent. Antony chose Cleopatra's plan over his own general's advice. Several senior commanders defected to Octavian that same night. On the morning of September 2nd, Antony's fleet rode out of the Gulf of Ambracia. Roughly 230 warships. He had burned the rest for lack of crews. Many of his rowers were conscripted farmers and slaves. His largest ships were towering war galleys with iron-plated rams and catapult towers, floating fortresses. Agrippa's fleet was waiting. Smaller, faster, around 400 ships. Lighter construction, more experienced crews, designed for speed and maneuverability against brute force. For hours, the two fleets stared at each other. Neither wanted to move first. Antony needed Agrippa's line to spread so he could punch through. Agrippa wanted Antony to extend so he could exploit the gaps. By midday, the battle finally joined. Agrippa's lighter ships darted in, launched volleys of fire and arrows, then pulled back before Antony's galleys could ram or grapple. Antony had the firepower, but couldn't pin down his targets. Then came the moment that changed everything. Early in the afternoon, Cleopatra's Egyptian squadron, 60 warships behind Antony's main line, suddenly raised their sails and broke south. They didn't engage. They didn't support Antony. They sailed straight through a gap in the battle and headed for open sea. To this day, historians debate why. Pre-planned breakout? Panic? Or was this always her plan? Preserve her fleet regardless of what happened to Antony. Whatever the reason, what happened next sealed Antony's fate. He saw Cleopatra leaving, and he abandoned his fleet to follow her. Mark Antony transferred to a smaller vessel and chased Cleopatra's squadron south. He left 200 ships and tens of thousands of men still fighting behind him. His fleet didn't know he was gone. They kept fighting for hours. When word spread that their commander had fled, resistance collapsed. Ships surrendered. Others were rammed and burned. Agrippa used fire ships to destroy those that refused to yield. By nightfall, Antony's fleet was annihilated. His 19 legions on shore waited 7 days for orders that never came. Then they surrendered without a fight. The Battle of Actium was over, and with it, the last chapter of the Roman Republic. Antony and Cleopatra sailed back to Alexandria with roughly 60 ships. They had escaped with their lives and lost everything else. Allies abandoned them daily. Client kings sent messages to Octavian. Every Eastern governor switched sides without a fight. Antony was broken. He withdrew from the palace and built a small dwelling on the harbor called the Timonium, named after Timon of Athens, the legendary misanthrope. He sat there alone, staring at the sea. Cleopatra didn't collapse. She schemed, negotiating with Octavian, exploring an escape route, dragging her fleet overland to the Red Sea to reach India, stockpiling treasure as leverage. She even tested poisons on condemned prisoners to find the quickest, painless death. She was preparing for every possible outcome. Octavian took his time. He spent the winter taking every territory Antony once held. By summer of 30 BC, he marched into Egypt. Antony attempted one last stand. His cavalry won a small skirmish, and the old fire briefly returned. He sent Octavian a challenge: single combat, general to general. Octavian's response was cold. He told Antony he could find plenty of other ways to die. The next morning, Antony led his forces out. He watched from the walls as his fleet rowed toward Octavian's ships, then raised their oars in salute and defected. His cavalry followed. The infantry melted away. There was no battle. There was nothing left to fight with. Antony returned to the palace, convinced Cleopatra had betrayed him. Then a message arrived. Cleopatra was dead. She had locked herself in her mausoleum. The message was false. She was alive, barricaded inside, uncertain of what Antony might do, but he believed it. He asked his slave Eros to kill him. Eros drew his sword, turned it on himself instead, and fell dead at Antony's feet. Antony drove his own sword into his stomach. He didn't die immediately. When word reached him Cleopatra was alive, he begged to be carried to her. She refused to open the doors. Terrified Octavian soldiers would storm in. She and her serving women hauled Antony up through a window using ropes. Mark Antony died in Cleopatra's arms on the floor of her own tomb. He was 53 years old. Octavian needed Cleopatra alive, for now. A captured queen would be the centerpiece of his triumph in Rome, dragged in chains before jeering crowds. He sent officers to reassure her, to keep her breathing long enough to be paraded. Cleopatra understood exactly what was waiting. She had seen Roman triumphs. Vercingetorix, the Gallic chieftain, had been paraded in Caesar's triumph and strangled in a dungeon. She had no intention of sharing that fate. For days she played along. She appeared cooperative, discussed terms, seemed defeated. On August 12th, 30 BC, she requested permission to visit Antony's tomb. She laid flowers and wept. She returned to her quarters. She bathed. She dressed in her royal regalia. She ate a final meal. When Octavian's men broke down the door, they found Cleopatra, the seventh dead, on a golden couch, dressed as a queen, her crown perfectly placed. Her serving woman Eris was dead at her feet. Another, Charmian, was barely alive, straightening the crown on Cleopatra's head. One of Octavian's men asked if this was right. Charmian's last words, "It is entirely right, and fitting for the descendant of so many kings." 47. The ancient sources say she died from an asp, an Egyptian cobra smuggled in with a basket of figs. Modern historians debate whether it was poison. It doesn't matter. She chose her own ending. The last pharaoh of Egypt died on her own terms. She was 39 years old. She had ruled for 21 of them. The ancient sources say she died from an asp, an Egyptian cobra smuggled in with a basket of figs. Modern historians debate whether it was poison. It doesn't matter. She chose her own ending. The last pharaoh of Egypt died on her own terms. She was 39 years old. She had ruled for 21 of them. Octavian executed Caesar and Cleopatra's 17-year-old son. His advisors told him there cannot be too many Caesars. Cleopatra's other children were taken to Rome and raised by Octavia, Antony's former wife, Octavian's sister. The mercy was calculated, the cruelty was strategic. Egypt became a Roman province, not a regular one, but Octavian's personal property. No senator could visit without permission. The wealth of the Nile now fed Rome through one man's hands. 3 years later, the Senate granted him a new name, Augustus. He never called himself king or emperor. He called himself first citizen. But he held absolute power over every army, every province, every law. The republic that endured for 482 years was finished. Not with a dramatic collapse, but with a quiet transformation. He kept the Senate, kept the elections, kept every appearance of the old system. He just made sure none of it mattered. Actium didn't decide a battle. It decided the next 500 years of human civilization. The Roman Empire that Augustus built shaped law, language, architecture, religion, and governance for the entire Western world. Every European empire that followed traced its lineage back to the system born on that September morning in 31 BC. It all came down to one afternoon on the water, one queen who sailed away, one general who followed her, and one cold, patient young man who waited for his enemies to destroy themselves.